All-seeing eyes? Octavia murmured while reading the telepath, but she looked up at the statue of Celestia, seeing that all eyes should have been, instead of the sight depressions, in the same shape as the gems that had found. It couldn't be. Quickly reaching into her saddlebag, she pulled out the green and yellow gemstones that she had found on her way through the hotel. Being careful not to touch the body, she leaned over to the statue and placed each gemstone into the hole they fit. Once they had both placed, she stepped back, waiting to see if anything happened. Stone scraping against the stone suddenly came from the statue, a shrill grinding as if something was opening within it. She watched as Celestia's head began to move over, ever so slightly, as if she was opening her muzzle. The sharp sound of metal sinking in flesh suddenly pierced in the air as a knife fell from the monarch's mouth and slammed straight into the pony's chest. The room fell silent, the process of having a parent finished. Octavia blinked, staring at the butcher's knife that had now strayed from the pony's chest. Well, that was just gruesome, Octavia grimaced. Some ponies must be really wanted to be twisted to come up with such a thing. Although it seems that not all was lost in the universe, and had given her something that she could use. Walking up to it gingerly, she reached her hoof out, wrapped it around the handle, and she pulled it from the body. The knife appeared to be in good condition, and had been sharp enough to pierce through the carcass flesh with ease. It was definitely aged knife, so she could see some scratching mirroring marks on the surface from years' use. With this, she would cut the rope that had tied down the hatch to room 113, that she could defend herself from the liquor and masked stallion if it come to that. Room 213 is a straight shot down main hallway from there. Octavia murmured to herself, thinking about the hotel's layout. If I run straight here, I should be able to avoid any more harm. The throb from her ribs reminded her of how hard the liquors could hit, but with how slow they would be easy enough to stay away from. With a goal in mind, she made her way towards the hallway and held a knife in her mouth. She cracked the door open, checking to see if the liquor was patrolling the hall, was waiting to ambush her again. When the phonograph remained silent, she took her cue and booked it out of the room, rushing down to the main hallway as quickly as she could. Speeding her way down, she kept her eyes peeled, expecting something to pop out in front of her. Her hooves echoed loudly in her head as each thudded with the carpet, hoping that she'd make it there safely. The hallway with the room 213, quickly came into her view, and her slowing down just enough for her to turn the corner quickly. Her phonograph erupted into a ringing as she heard the familiar squelch of the liquor heading towards her from the other end of the hallway. She wasted no time rushing up straight towards the doors to room 213, and pushing it open and slamming it close behind her. She braced for the door again, her phonograph growing quieter with each room, but wanted nothing more than to go silent. She then reached to the liquor's sink and found a way around it before it walked away. She let out a sigh of relief as her phonograph went silent. When she tied down the hatch that was waiting for her on the same area it had been since she first arrived, the room taking out her knife into her mouth, she slid the sharp under the rope and began to slice. The rope was tough and it looked like with some doing, but cut it out to be complete undone. Splitting apart with each stroke, it didn't take long before the rope finally snapped, feeling free from the hatch while wringing it and holding it down, and she quickly pulled the rest of the rope before grabbing the handle and pulling the hatch open. Room 113 was completely pitch black and silent. "Hello?" Octavia called out, poking her lantern down into the hole to try to get a better look. "Is anyone down here?" Her lantern illuminated parts of the room, but not enough for her to get a good view of it. She just tried to adjust to a look at the bed when the lantern suddenly slipped from her hooves. "Shit!" She then cursed under her breath, watching the lantern strike at the edge of the bed and rolling towards a corner of the room. She was now stuck in darkness with both of the rooms, unless she jumped down after it. "I suppose I was planning on going down there anyway," she reasoned with herself, feeling a chill down her spine. She didn't look like it was a quiet room that was now like as if it had been open. If the couple was still in the room, they should have spoken up by now, but they were deadly silent. Taking a deep breath to seal her nerves, she clamped down the knife in her mouth again, jumped down into the room, managed to land with a graceful but loud thud. She sharply winced as all of her bruises from previous fights yelled at her once over that it was a bad idea as it was. She breathed sharply through her nose to relegate the pain before turning to pick up her lantern. Her phonograph burst to life, the shrill ringing striking her ears as her eyes shot open wide. She twirled around on the spot, backing up slowly as the sound of squelching hit her ears. At the edge of the lantern's light came from a form of a licker, its tongue sliding out of its mouth. A thick appendage shot forward like a bolt of lightning, suddenly smacking down hard against her neck and wrapping itself around it. Octavia shrieked, and the knife falling from her mouth before the tongue tightened and pulled, lifting her into the air. As she desperately clawed at the appendage, constricting her airway, desperate to breathe. The creature then screeched loudly as her body was then suddenly tossed like a rag doll, being slammed hard against the room's walls. The air escaped her hooves and the body as she fell, the tongue letting go of her neck. She coughed and hacked, and her hooves grasping at her throat from the pain. The licker's tongue had struck her again, smacking her hard against her face as she began to wriggle it down her body. She could feel every inch of its saliva coating her fur as it slid down, the barrel and her stomach wrapping around her hip as if she was tasting her. She then began to scream as the lingering saliva started to burn at her skin. Every liquid was eating her away. The licker drew closer, cornering her with its body, and continued to taste her, loudly squelching and squealing through the entire process. Octavia gritted her teeth, hissing at the pain while covering her body. She squinted her eyes open, seeing the knife just barely within reach. She lifted her hind hoof and pressed down on it, able to pull closer towards it. The licker screeched at this, slamming her head against the wall, exciting another cry of pain from Octavia. She shuddered as she did her best to flick the knife towards her in her hind hoof, and she sailed cleanly along the carpet, striking close to the wall behind her. The monstrous tongue was sliding down between her thighs, causing her to scream again as she finally managed to grab a hold of the knife. With a loud cry, Octavia swung the knife and hard into its head, the weapon easily striking her target. It let out a horrific pain screech as it swiftly pulled back, its tongue leaving its body with the thrash and pain. She was far from done through it, as she let out another enraged scream, tackling into the ground as she pulled the knife out of its head. Each stab was then filled with the intense fury as she roared and screamed at the creature, cursing it, demanding it to die with each violent stab. She kept stabbing, even after it stopped thrashing, even after the phonograph had gone silent, and even after the creature had bled enough to stop the splattering blood against her coat. The final stab then pierced through the creature's skin as she hung her head, breathing heavily from the pain of adrenaline. It finally began to subside. Her entire body shuddered, recoiling from the pain and trauma of what had just happened. She lifted her head up, just enough to stare at the corpse beneath her. The licker's tongue, long since detached, curled up onto the floor by its head. Its body was mutilated beyond recognition from her assault. She finally got up from the creature, stepping away from it, still panting heavily. She then looked down at the knife in her hooves, seeing as it was still dripping with blood. She saw the blood splattered against her coat, and then saw the burnt fur. What followed by was a trail of the licker's tongue. She shuddered, feeling utterly disgusting with what the creature's vile fluids all over her. With her body aching, she put away the knife and finally picked up her lantern and looked at the room. A mare's body lay on the bed, with her black hair scattered amongst the bodied carcasses. But there was no so much blood covering her that was identifying her was impossible. "I'm so sorry." Octavia hung her head solemnly. There was nothing she could do for the mare. The light of her lantern glinted off something at the bedside table next to the mare's corpse. On her shaking legs, she made her way over to it, lifting up the lantern enough just to get a good look at it. It was old, rusty blue jewel in the shape of the contrabass. She stuffed the jewel away into her saddlebag, and then glanced around the room once more. With nothing else in the room, she wandered over to the door and unlocked it. "Well, that's everything," Octavia murmured quietly out the hallway. "I checked every room, and I could not, but only did the key not open any of them. I couldn't find Ellie. All she could manage to do was the postcard with the riddle on it, and a weapon to defend herself from the monsters." She limped her way down the hall, back to the front lobby as she tried to think of what she had gone wrong. She had only wanted to see her sisters, and she only wanted to protect the little filly. She had only wanted the company of another pony. Where had she gone wrong? Octavia's breath hitched as her throat, then she shook her head, trying not to let the tears spill out. She just wanted to be done with this place, if it had something to offer her in her way of answers. She came to a stop in the lobby, turning her head towards the reception's desk and the strange door that was placed behind it. She stared at it for a few moments before it clicked in her head. A red moon. One of the moons on the door was red. That must have been what the riddle was talking about. With some hope of returning to her, she moved to the door as quickly as she could to examine it in closer detail. The images of Luna and Celestia were drawn with their bodies wrapped around two holes in the door that just happened to be in the shapes she recognized. She reached into her bag and pulled out the balloon and the compressed jewels, placing the red balloon onto Celestia's hole and the contrabrass into Luna's. And as the second jewel had been lifted inside, the door began to move, stone grinding in stone, as the lock on the door extended out. It came to stop a few inches out, looking as if she could turn the pictures and dials. The red moon was shining brightly. Octavia murmured, staring at the dials. She pressed her hooves against the pictures and turned them until the red moon was on top of the topmost picture. So what's the time? She then racked her brain, thinking the riddle over. I guess she would shine the brightest at midnight. She was uncertain if it was a true answer, but it was worth a shot. She grabbed the dials on the clock and turned them until they pointed at midnight. Octavia jumped to her skin as the clock chimed out loudly, having her successfully solved the puzzle. The dials moved back to the door, and the clock continued to chime, the door loudly sliding up into the ceiling as it opened. The clock finished chiming once more, and once it chimed for the 12th time, and the room fell silent. Seems like it's a way of opening up for me, she murmured, throwing her brow as she stated her head. Where does this lead, though? Lifting her lantern, she entered the new room that had opened up. Her ear flickered as she heard something out in the distance, tilting her head for her to listen. It was a siren, blaring out across Ponyville in a warning. In warning to what, though? The town was already infested with monsters. She turned her head back to the room as she entered, seeing nothing but just a small square room in the cement of all the ground. The bodies of two ponies wrapped in cloth hung from the hooks, and from the corners pools of blood sitting up beneath them, and the wooden door placed between them. Above the door were the words written in blood, "Who will be born again tonight?" A shudder ran down Octavia's spine as an obnoxious feeling crept over her. She pushed it forward, gripping the handle of the door, and entered the next room.